Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Assets and Infrastructure meeting for July 2023. Thank you all for your attendance. Could you please be upstanding for the council prayer? Almighty God, as members of the Rangitikei District Council, we give thanks for all the good things of our district and the advantages we enjoy. We pray that you will give us wisdom and guidance as we conduct the affairs of this meeting. We pray for all the communities in the district we represent. Help us to be fair and honest in our discussions, and help us to work together in the unity for the welfare of all your people. Amen. Thank you, councillors. Once again, welcome. I'd like to welcome Hamish Waugh. Hamish is the Group Manager of Assets Infrastructure for MDC, our infrastructure partner. Welcome, Hamish. And Hamish is here today as our Group Manager. Arno is away on leave, hopefully resting up, fishing, skiing, or doing something other than looking at council work. However, I find that difficult to believe that he won't be probably zooming in or looking at his order papers. So welcome along, Hamish, and thank you. We welcome your input and conversations as we go through the meeting.
Thank you, Mr.
I have received a number of apologies. Firstly, an apology from Councillor Greg Maughan, Laquan Mirihana from our representative from Te Rupi Ahika, and an apology from Councillor Brian Carter. Could I have a mover that those apologies be accepted? Moved Councillor Lambert, seconded from Councillor Duncan. All those in favour? Against? That motion is carried. Thank you. Public forum, have not been advised of any public forum today. Members' conflict of interest. We are all well aware of the rules around conflict of interest. If you do have one, please state if you have one particular to the item on the agenda in front of you, or raise it as we get to that point throughout today's meeting. Confirmation of order of business. I have not been notified of any change in the order of business, so we will follow as per the agenda that is in front of you. And moving through to item 6 on that agenda is the confirmation of minutes from the Assets and Infrastructure meeting held on the 13th of April 2023. I know you will have all read. Rather than going through these minutes individually, give you an opportunity to refresh. Is there anything specifically in those minutes that have been sent to you all that any members wish to raise? I'm not seeing any hands coming up, so could I move that they be accepted as a true and correct record? I'll move. Seconded, Worship Mr. Watson. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Moving on now to the follow-ups action list. Again, has been sent to you all. Rather than going through that in an individual basis, is there anything specifically in the follow-ups and actions list register? We have 5 active there. Anything particular over and above the status comments and updates from staff?
Your Worship. Just one item 2, the Pukipapa Makirikiri Road, the reseal. That was because of poor performance? Question mark?
That is a question that
just refresh my mind on that.
That's April 23 as an action was on that one. That was from the April meeting. Who's paying for the reseal? There's no start update on that. I don't believe that in the absence of our Chief Operating Officer, we can probably answer that today. Would you like to see that expanded for a greater action, or do you have some information on it yourself?
No, I don't, but I was just presuming that why it's been raised, the presumption would be that it was done and had to be redone because of poor performance, would be my assumption. But I was just asking if that was actually the reason.
Good question, Your Worship. It's something that I'm unable to answer, and I'm not sure that we can give a defined clarity on an answer on that. Is there an action that we can take out of that by the Chief Executive and possibly through yourself, Hamish, to to get an answer to that?
The action's already there, Mr. Chair, so if that's okay, so I'm quite happy to make sure we continue to deliver on the actions that have been requested.
Just noting it's got nothing in the status is probably where the confusion possibly is. It doesn't have a progress on that. So.
You're right.
Yep. Okay, anything further from the actions and follow-up list? Being none, I'll move from the chair that that item be accepted. Moving from the chair, do we have a seconder? Councillor Dalgety, thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That motion is carried. Thank you. Chair's report as sent to you all. You have seen that it is in the order paper. Don't specifically want to speak to it. It's just, again, just my thoughts on where we're at on some of the matters in front of us. Any particular questions from councillors regarding that, what was in my chair's report as to date? That was an easy get off. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Very well explained, very well laid out.
Thank you. I'll take that as a win. Okay, so if there being no further questions on that, I'll move my chair report to be accepted. Seconded from Councillor Lambert. Thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Now, we move on to item 9 on the agenda, reports with decisions, operation infrastructure report. Hamish, will you be taking us through that at this stage in Arno's absence, particularly relating to the emergency works?
Certainly will. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you to our committee members. So probably the main thing to talk about here is with the emergency works that we've had, particularly over the last, I'll say 24 months, 18 to 24 months, and then again particularly this year. It puts a lot of pressure on two things. One is council's budget, and secondly is council's resourcing, both through the roading contractor and any subcontractors they may have, and also the internal team. So if you look at that list on page 15 of the agenda, that's quite a lot of emergency works and related expenditure over quite a condensed period, and it obviously has quite a lot of extra effort to go into repairing the network. The implication of that repair is that whilst and again it depends on the nature and scale, but we've had a couple of reasonable size events. What that essentially means is that the contracting resource that's available to deliver the agreed work program is largely diverted into emergency works. So the emergency works take precedent over the scheduled work, and they're kind of parked for later. The other complication, which is a complication shared between both Manawatu, Rangitikei, and I'm sure many other councils, the approval process with NZTA, Waka Kotahi, can take quite some time. And so we effectively end up bankrolling the emergency works out of the existing road maintenance budget, which means the works are done when the claim is finally approved. And there's quite an approval process in terms of validation of the claim and the works that need to be done. Once that claim is approved through the TO, the Transport Investment Online system that NZTA run, then the approved emergency works claim is paid the following month. But what it means is that we've had to spend our existing roading budget in the interim and allocate those roading resources in the interim. So when you've got one event over 2 or 3 years, it's reasonably straightforward to manage that into your work program. When you've got nearly a dozen specific events over a sort of an 18-month period, it really has a substantial effect in terms of our ability to deliver on our works program. And so what you'll find is a lot of the sort of the routine and cyclic stuff does fall behind. And I think that's evidenced through our sort of number of service requests that we've received over that period. And also the planned and scheduled works just get deferred and deferred. So that's a very genuine concern that we have. But from a cash flow point of view, it's a matter of just doing what we can with the budget we've got and wait for the Waka Kotahi subsidy to come in afterwards. The other component to that too is that the funding window works in a 3-yearly block. So in terms of your subsidised work program, if you are not able to deliver your planned maintenance and repair work in any given year, you can carry it forward to the next year and then to the 3rd year of a 3-year block if need be. NZTA are traditionally very sort of firm that at the end of that 3-year period, If you haven't spent your money, then it's gone effectively. So that's a very conscious part of what we're working with NZTA on. I think, given the nature of the emergency events that we've had, I've not had confirmation from NZTA in terms of any carryovers beyond that 3-year period, but we'll certainly be asking that is taken into account, given the volume of other works and just our actual capacity to get this work done within the typical timeframe. So that 3-year period aligns with both our roading maintenance contract, it aligns with our long-term planning process, and so the current year is year 3 of that of that 3-year block, and so we need to have that conversation over the next 6 months or so with the New Zealand Transport Agency around that unspent funding from previous years and the implications of the emergency works that we've had. So.
Yeah, sorry, you can't be him today. Sorry, we'll keep example, Mr. Beggs, you've got comment.
Oh, no, I just think it's, what Mr. Ward said near the end of that, I think might be of great interest to elected members or to committee members. That is, so as councils go through our long-term plan, we're also applying for funding to the NLTP, the Land Transport Plan with Waka Kotahi. And I just wonder, at what point does that normally come to council in terms of council endorsing the strategy or the application, etc.?
Yeah. So typically we would have the first draft of the funding application together to the NZTA funding sort of committee, if you like, by about August, September. And so that's based on our own asset management planning, and then within the RAM asset data management system that we have for roading. That gives us a really good program in terms of scheduled renewals, pavement rehabilitations, reseals and the like. And so that goes into the sort of the first round. The way that Waka Kotahi plan will manage that throughout the regions and nationally is it all goes into the bucket, if you like. They'll look at that prioritisation, other directives they've had from above, and then they'll look at what budgets they've got available. Typically, we try and get confirmation from them before our budgets close. So that's, you know, by the end of June at the very, very latest, although usually with your long-term planning budgets, you need to have that well and truly in advance of that. It can be September of that year before they confirm what they've got. From experience, excuse me, typically they will approve less than what we've asked for. So what it would mean is that if we've put our local share in to match the proposed program, and then they reduce that program, it means that we're potentially overfunded, which is, I would say, better than underfunding it in terms of them giving us more money, which, to be honest, doesn't happen anyway. And in our current climate, with the amount of emergency works expenditure in the Hawke's Bay and Te Rāwhiti, it's not going to happen anytime soon where we get more money. So yeah, if we looked at August, September of this year for the initial cut, there's a series of iterations over that, and then hope is not a strategy, but you would hope it's done before we get the end of the council budgets for the LTP, but more likely it'll fall into the first quarter of next financial year.
I just asked
Yeah.
So in terms of the NLTP submission, does that come to this council before it goes to Waka Kotahi?
I would say yes, it should do.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of where we're at with it. Yeah.
So our committee would anticipate that in August or September.
That's what we're aiming for, yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
Can I just make a clarification? So we have actually scheduled this as part of one of the LTP workshops. So John Jones is coming along to that as part of the NLT presentation and Waka Kotahi. We invited them in September, and then the asset management plan is due to come to a workshop in November as well.
Okay, that
So
would
we've scheduled
ultimately
those.
give the committee a great understanding of what that process is going forward.
Yeah,
Just-
if I could too, I think in terms of those processes coming to workshop, it's not seeking approval from council to submit that as such. This is the indication of the initial funding round. This is what's in and out, and then it gives us a start point. Effectively, it's the approval of the budget, and then the subsequent NZTA approved budget is where the council approval of the local share comes into it in terms of a formal council process.
I note that this is a reasonably full report on the funding that's been approved. And if you look at the numbers that are in there, it's my understanding that they're accurate as at today's date of where we're at. $7 million odd dollars. That obviously has a reasonably significant financial impact within the cash flows of the council. And I wondered if we, and I see Dave in the back of the room, where do we see that reported? Is that in finance, what that impact has? Because clearly we pay our contractors and it's coming out of our operational budget. But where do we see the impact of this just flowing back in when these numbers are all approved?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, there's three main impacts of this. From a cash flow point of view, obviously we have to pay these costs up front before we get it recouped. But that's fairly standard for the normal NZTA work anyway. And because this is spread over maybe 3 financial years, it's kind of not as dramatic as 7.1 million we've got to find overnight. It's spread over 3 years. It's generally speaking, correct me if I'm wrong, Hamish, a lot of this work replaces other work we would otherwise have done. So we're just spending it on different roads, oversimplistically. So that's one aspect of the cash flow aspect is that. From a debt point of view, again, it replaces other expenditure we would have done, so it doesn't really impact on the debt. So
With these,
from a financial perspective, it's got more of an operational.
so the
impact.
operational impact is the fact of delaying what is scheduled works program that we've got, and lower in the report, we can see we've got a number of jobs that we've still got scheduled. So that's where the impact physically is to council's operation, is in the operational side of the ability to get it done.
That's correct.
Yeah, if I can take your mind back to the Finance Performance Committee, the financial snapshot we show each month, the major variance in all of this stuff is in the CapEx, where the scheduled work program is under budget because we've got like-for-like dollar spend in emergency works.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dalgety.
Thank you, Hamish. So does it ever eventuate that we apply for this emergency works, we've actually fixed it up ourselves out of our cash flow, and then NZTA don't come back and reimburse us?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that is an ongoing part of the relationship with the NZTA regional investment representatives. We provide at the beginning of and during and immediately after an event as much proof and evidence and photographic record of the damage, and then that becomes the basis of our claim. There is I won't call it horse trading, but there's a challenge there from NZTA regularly around what's genuine emergency works and what's not. By and large, the day-to-day stuff is cleaned up, and things like major culverts or bridge replacements, we have that kind of confirmed before we embark on the majors. So yes, there's probably on the periphery of those numbers throughout the claim process. There's a bit of give and take, but by and large, the bigger stuff is locked in reasonably well. Yeah.
Councillor Lamb.
Just a comment really, it's sort of always been the back of my mind. It's a bit of concern the way Mother Nature's gone haywire the last few years, and under the current system, like it's sort of designed for a major weather event every 5 years or whatever, and the more regular, and then the regular work's getting delayed. It almost snowballed to the point where the system will break down, basically. Because if your maintenance is getting too far behind because all the money's going with you, and like we're spending our own money trying to fix these things and come back, it's like what you were talking about, that money carried over is almost going to become crucial.
That is through you, Mr. Chair. That is a key part of the conversation. You're quite right, and it's the routine and cyclic stuff that you can push a pavement resale out, you can push a rehab out, or a rip and remake, whatever it might be. But it's that ongoing work around network maintenance, keeping the culverts clear, making sure that your environment, your sight lines are maintained around your corners, and your traffic safety components are in there. So there's a lot of pressure that goes into that area. But in terms of the renewal and investment, you're quite right.
Yeah.
If I could, Mr. Chair, it's exactly the same issue we're experiencing in Manawatu, and I'm sure there's a number of other councils, particularly in the Gabrielle affected sort of patch. Yeah. That figure there for Rangitikei of 7.1 million, the equivalent figure for Manawatu is $13.25 million, with a lot of damage down there, and it's exactly the same issue where we've had to spend maintenance money to do the repairs and the emergency works response, and then exactly the same claim process to get that money back out of NZTA. So we're not alone in these challenges.
I think it's good just to highlight the complexities of these issues, because they don't go away, and they have a snowball effect on other areas of the operation. Your Worship, you had a question?
Yeah, a series of them. Thank you for this conversation. It's fantastic. First of all, in terms of the definition of an emergency work, there's a shades of green in here, of grey and black, sorry, because really an emergency work isn't one necessarily that is generated by a climatic event. An emergency work is work that is not done as part and parcel of your annual plan, long-term plan process. So if there is additional work, there are two categories of that in my mind. The first is when we talk, and our Chief Financial Officer has talked about a replacement of work, the governors are responsible for the asset management program. And so that's quite a natural event, but if there is a substitution, council gets informed about that process. But if you take emergency work as being things outside of the annual plan LTP process, it's not always, in my mind, a climatic event. For example, the damage to the Otara Bridge is an emergency work in the definition that is not sitting within our annual plan, long-term plan, but needs to be done to maintain the integrity of the network, if you like. And I think Councillor Dalgetty's question around whether there could be the situation where Waka Kotahi don't approve and we have spent the money is, in these times, a very, very real question. So when I go to Waka Kotahi's board, they are actively saying, actually, there will be roads that will not be replaced. And so whether it is, Tasman or somewhere else, where those road discussions are happening at the moment. So there is a very real risk in my mind that councils do work and then are not able to claim.
Just on that point, would you see it as being roads not being repaired or not repaired to the same level of service? Because there's two slightly different differentiations on that.
Yeah, the end result is it amounts to the same thing. It amounts to a debt that the council has taken on to provide that service. It's either a big debt by not being replaced, not being funded at all, or funded at a different level, but it's still a debt. This is probably, because Arno's not here, and this is probably an unfair question, but we did a road trip, councillors and senior staff, up the Turkina Valley, and we looked at a fairly substantial dropout that had been repaired once before, and now it's literally another one identical. As one of the listed ones in this report, is that identified in that schedule?
I'm sorry, I'm not able to.
Yeah, it would just be interesting for, I suspect that it might be item 1, 2023, which was identified at about 1.2 million. And that was roughly the sum of money that we put into the previous dropout. But here we're doing one that pretty much mirrors exactly what happened, 20 metres ago away, and we're probably likely to have another one in the same facility. It's just going to go further and further up the valley. So there's that. I appreciate the questions on cash flow because I think it is a real risk. That's pretty much it from me. But the Otara Bridge one, we are proceeding with the work. We are proceeding with on the assumption that Waka Kotahi will fund. Chief Executive shaking his head, so
Comment.
explanation.
Mr. Biggs.
The Otara Bridge isn't, and I respect what you've said in terms of emergency events. I don't have any indication from our contractor that this is subsidised by Waka Kotahi any differently to our normal work. All that we have advised elected members of thus far is that the analysis of the problem is being investigated. And that's all. That's the only thing we've said. Yeah. And so I can't I'm sorry to disagree with
Yeah.
your worship, but,
Well, put it this way, the community expectation is that we will repair the bridge.
so
And as part of that expectation, we're going through a process that will funnel us into a repair program and expense. At the moment, it's just an investigation process, but that does come at the start of an expense schedule, if you like. And there is the expectation that Waka Kotahi will fund. And it's just an illustration of the risk that we routinely face with all of these jobs.
Yes, but on that, the question would be whether or not they're funding at our standard fare rate or funding at an emergency fare rate. And I would suggest that there's perhaps a little bit of differentiation in between those two factors. But is there any further comment on that particular subject?
there is an action from full council for us to provide, or for staff to provide an update on the costs thus far, and we'll continue to do that and keep our elected members informed, particularly when there's a decision that will need to be made.
Thank you. And I also note on that the correspondence that has been going out to the broader community via communication channels through NBC and through RDC have been good and as thorough as we can expect in what is a difficult situation, a difficult process to manage. So thank you to both agencies for that. Councillor Wong.
I'll take on board what His Worship has said about expectation of Whakatahi funding our emergency works. But could I ask Mr. War, we're getting behind in our scheduled maintenance because of the emergency works, but is the limitation due to funding or the resources of our contractors?
Resources of our contractors is a key part of that. So as the emergency works funding is approved through the NZTA claim process, and you'll see at the very top of the list on page 15, we've still got the most recent event. We're still waiting on the quantification of the numbers and the approval for that. But the contractor's ability to do a year's worth of or 2 years worth of work in 1 year is a real risk to getting that program delivered.
So is there appetite for council to perhaps take on a bigger chunk of work on the expectation that we will be to engage the contractors to a great extent on the expectation that there's going to be a certain amount of emergency works engaged in that period of time? Do you understand what I mean?
Quite sure.
Yeah, I don't. This is possibly getting us into perhaps not the most conservative position, but considering that how far we're being behind in our scheduled maintenance, I think we'd have to it'd be one way of achieving the.
My thinking is that would be something that would form part of your pending roading procurement and what your expectations are going for the renewal of your road contracts going forward, is where you might possibly have that conversation, would be my thinking. I'm not quite sure on that, but it would be my thinking if that was to be looking to increase that, but that's going to come into financial cost and.
It's going to come in everywhere.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Loudon.
Through you, Chair. This is the first table. The approved funding, is that 100% of what was asked for, or is that, how does that sort of relate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's the total cost of the emergency works.
Yep.
Of which the NZTA fire rate applies within that, and then the local share comes through from the RDC operating budget.
With the pressure on the Waka Kotahi's funding through Gabrielle, etc., is there a situation where they may start reducing the percentage they pay on what's been asked for?
So in the current financial year, no, that the current 3-year funding block is locked in. You'll be aware that NZTA did a FAR funding assistance rate review 5-6 years ago now, and so the current FAR rate that we have has been effectively locked in the current levels. There's nothing to date to suggest that there is an additional FAR review coming. My gut feel is what they would end up doing is just reduce the total amount of funding available or what portion of the program they would fund. Because they simply don't have the money. They're talking some large numbers to repair the Cyclone Gabrielle particularly, but also some of the works up in Northland and Auckland. So I don't think there's any impending fire review. That may change. NZTA board may have an inside run on that, but for us the risk is as we go forward in the next 12 months to confirm the next 3-year funding block, that's when the NZTA funding envelope will be really in the spotlight.
Subsequent, and then I'll go to his worship.
Just with, quietly falling behind on our maintenance program because of lack of ability through emergency works. The fact that the maintenance isn't being kept up, does that make us more vulnerable to further emergency works because of climate change issues?
Through Mr. Chair, it makes us more vulnerable in terms of the overall level of service on the network. So if there's a reseal or a pavement rehabilitation that's planned, for example, then there's a higher risk of that failure in the next year or so. In terms of risk around emergency works, a lot of that is around the roadside maintenance, culvert clearing and the like. But then also on top of that, if those rehabs and reseals haven't been done, and you have an emergency event, then there is a higher risk in terms of pavement damage or seal damage, which then leads into your dropouts and slips and the like as well. So not directly, but indirectly, yes, it does. If you're not investing the renewal and maintenance money on your network as planned, it does sort of extend that risk profile out for something that could go wrong the next year, the year after, the year after. If we get on top of it over the next few years, then obviously that risk is mitigated, but that requires the funding to be carried over, contractors to be available, and actually get through the full works program.
Thank you, Councillor Loudon. I think that's a very valid question that all councillors share the concern of. Your worship.
Yeah, at Waka Kotahi's board meeting the other day, they did mention the possibility of a review or a request to government for the review of the far rates. So it is on their mind. But probably the biggest threat to our networks, in my mind, is actually putting in place one network road classification, which would see potentially a significant drop in the levels of service for our district, a narrowing of the width of carriageway that they will pay for, and potentially roads that are in seal reverting back to metal as a standard throughout the country according to use.
Yes,
and they're actively talking about those positions.
Share your thoughts on that, because that's been bouncing around for a wee while.
And I've warned council for the last few years, this is the deterioration that we're going to see in our networks, and it's starting to play out now. But in terms of Councillor Wong's question around capacity, with these emergency works and the capacity for instance, our current contractor to fulfill them, we have the ability to go out for a separate contract to someone else under emergency works. So it doesn't have to be provided by Higgins. I know there's also lack of depth in every other contractor as well. But, is that, do we routinely touch base with some of the other individual contractors that could do the job?
So you must check. The short answer is yes, we do. I mean, we are obliged under the maintenance contract to give Higgins sort of the first opportunity in that space. But there is capacity there if they're unable to deliver works either directly or through subcontractors within a required time frame, then we do have that ability. But to be honest, if Higgins could deliver something through a subcontractor, as opposed to us going directly to the subcontractor, then they probably would through the contract. So it does get quite murky when you start chopping the work up.
When you say obliged, is that a legal obligation within the contract to go to them first, or is it a preference because they have equipment and gear in a relationship?
I'll have to check the specific wording of the contract, but traditionally it is specified in the works as having the capacity there. Part of the overall scope of the contract includes the the crews for the scheduled works and the ability to respond in terms of emergency works. You can't quantify a Cyclone Gabrielle event versus a heavy rainfall event, so it's very hard to be black and white on that, but the contract does give them a first rights on that. Yeah.
And just a final comment in response to Councillor Loudon. Cyclone Gabrielle has largely been funded by a separate area of government. You know, there was a direct grant from Treasury in terms of road reinstatement.
Just so we can perhaps move this item along a little bit, and just for some clarity, and I'm sure most of the councillors will know this, but there's different levels of the FAR rate that apply. So we have our standard FAR rate for our daily operations of what have been submitted through in the works program, but under an emergency operation, there is an increased FAR rate often applies. So the percentage, with your question about what the total percentages will approve, may vary depending on what the nature of the application is at the time and the percentage of funding that we get back at that FAR rate. Obviously, sometimes an emergency, unless I'm mistaken, in an emergency event, the FAR rate can be significantly higher, so it will affect these overall numbers as to what actually comes back into the council coffers. It's two different numbers.
Could I add a comment to that? Yeah, and that's exactly right. And it comes back to the size of the event in proportion to the size of your annual maintenance spend. So effectively, the 10% of the network investment is the first sort of hurdle, if you like. So if you, for example, round figures, if your roading program was $10 million a year, the first $1 million of emergency works is paid at the same FAR rate. Over and above that, there's an enhanced FAR which increases it by 20%. And so if you had a big event, then you'd effectively get what's our current FAR rate? 63. So 83% would be for the over $1 million, with the 63 applying to the first million. And then if you had a major Gabrielle type event that hit the Rangitikei, there'd be a direct conversation with NZTA, and we'd be looking to get 90 to 100% where we could. That's entirely at their discretion.
Thank you for that clarity. Councillor Duncan.
So just a quick question. So looking at this, back to this chart again, the January event, was that Cyclone Hale?
Yes, it was.
And subsequent, please, through you, Mr. Chair. So that would also be more of along the lines of what His Worship was saying, would have a greater and a different type of funding for that one. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jalgeti.
I'm just sorry to further the conversation, but so just, I know this is difficult, but based on what you know now, do you think we will catch up with our low cost, low risk, or the outstanding work in the next couple of years, as you alluded to?
If I give you my honest opinion, we will not get everything done in the next year based on the last 2 years worth of deferred maintenance works. If we can carry the funding over outside that 3-year block, and that's an NZTA discretion, we would catch up over 2 or 3 years. If that funding disappears at the end of June, then obviously we need to reevaluate the funding priorities for the next 3-year block. So that there's a lot of work to do in the next 12 months to get back to square. That's my personal opinion.
So, follow-up question. So, therefore, back to Councillor Wong's conclusion, in our forthcoming negotiations around procurement, should we be upping the ante effectively to get that work secured?
Yes. I think what is effectively this conversation is given that 63% of our funding comes from central government, you are asking them to pay in advance for an event that hasn't happened, and just sort of guessing at what, or anticipating a number that is to be advised kind of number. And I would anticipate that would not be something that Waka Kotahi would entertain. Despite
No, I'm referring to the work that's not been completed, that needs to be done, that's on our Yeah, so I think that is work that we know about. Yeah,
Yes, so I think if I'm understanding the question, the roading re-procurement process
Yes.
being separate from the network deferred maintenance, if NZTA are willing to carry forward any deferred maintenance funding as a result of the cyclones, then that work could be added to the schedule for the next contract round as part of our procured schedule of works. But there's no point in procuring contractors to do the work if there's no funding for it. And as the Chief Executive points out, NZTA wouldn't give you a discretionary few $1 million just in case outside of that 3 years as well.
thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. One last question on that.
I do know, and I can't repeat to the council, the size of the fiscal hole that Waka Kotahi face. It is an incredibly substantial hole. And you have to remember that also that you're going to have an election. And their funding is determined by Treasury. So the pressures on Treasury to fund the current fiscal hole will be substantial.
Appreciate the comment, Your Worship, but far outside this meeting's ability to influence, I would suggest that we're all well aware of the issues nationwide with our infrastructure. So,
Well, I've got some degree of influence in there because I'm part of a small group of mayors that from time to time sit on that representing the rural sector.
thank you. Just perhaps looking through this report and flicking through very quickly, I think there are lots of positives in it as well. We shouldn't be always focusing on the negatives. There's a large number of things that have been completed, and that's good to see. This is a bit of a wash-up report. I take it as to where we've got to. So I think it's pleasing to see that the amount of work that we have got done, while acknowledging the constraints that we have had, and the discussion that we've just had has emphasised that. So I think there is a number of positives in there, and I thank the infrastructure team and the people that do that work and the roading for tackling what is. It's a difficult space to be in, with constant pressures coming from all corners and all directions, and lots of pulling from one direction to another direction. And of course, it's the old story, the pothole outside everybody's front door is the biggest issue that's happening in the world at any one moment, and the difficulties of getting to the pothole are very clear. So we appreciate
If I
that.
could, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chair, for that comment, because you're right, it is easy to focus on the stuff that doesn't get done, but there is a really committed team internally here within the RDC framework and the shared services that do work very hard to achieve this, and despite the contractor not having unlimited resources, what they do have, they're out there all the time.
Yeah,
So
they're doing the best that they can. So we
I'll pass it
appreciate
on to
that.
the teams.
Thank you. Just on that, and I don't want a detailed answer on that, and the fact that everything has been completed, there is and I'm sure that you have and manage a completion sign-off process for these jobs when they're all done?
Yes, we do.
That's all just standard operations?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Was there anything else particularly in the operational infrastructure report? We've had a bit of a thrash out on that one. I did know when we started to talk roading that it was going to get a little bit of a lot of discussion going, which is good, because it's good that we get an understanding of some of the complexities, and obviously we're in a public meeting that's been live streamed, so I think it's good that those that are perhaps watching online understand the complexities of the issues that we as a council face. Councillor
Yeah,
Leader.
the chair certainly indicated in his letter he likes vigorous debate on these things.
Good. Yeah, I did. Don't let that come back to me and haunt me.
No.
So is there anything else on that, or can I move that the operational infrastructure report be received? I'll move from the chair. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Lambert? All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That motion is carried. Thank you. Moving to the project manager's report, noting that this report is, I believe, the same report we received at council a week, 10 days ago. So if councillors could just make a note of that, we have seen this report before and there has been comment on it. Is there any updates that you'd like to bring us that are fresh updates from the last time we reviewed this report?
Yeah, there are probably a couple, actually. So I'm, of course, happy to take questions as well to any of the projects in more detail. What I wanted to point out was around the Martin water strategy. Is obviously at the moment, it looks like not much is happening in that space. They are very busy trying to get the borehole established. There's a number of detailed work that has to be done there. So they're trying to get the screens down. There will be a point where they're deciding what sort of size screen it will be to filter the water through and not the sand and the stones that is also down there. So it is still fairly complex, and it will take until August at least at the moment. But we're getting good updates on where this is tracking. We are trying to get the design process started, which is proving a little bit more difficult than we were hoping for. The demand on consultants in the space of resource consenting and that sort of water design space is really huge at the moment, and I'm assuming that there's quite some work that is going through Hawke's Bay at the moment, where a lot of treatment plants have to be renewed because of the damage. So we're definitely seeing some of that effect, but we are talking with one consultant, and hopefully by the end of the month we have established a bit of a arrangement of how we're going to go forward with the design. I know that Arno has done a lot of work in that space already and is quite clear on what is needed. The water that is in the bore that we have found is very similar to the Tutunui bore already, so that the challenges are known. Yeah, so that is actually quite helpful. And we're not treating two different pieces of water that are very different. So yeah, we're still hopeful that we are within time frame and within the budgets. Just trying to get them nailed down is the challenge at the moment.
Thank you for that. And just on that, I note that even though you've indicated that there are potentially some delays through outside reasons, I might add, I note you haven't indicated a change in the start-finish dates, the timelines. You're still confident we're within those timelines, even though you're experiencing these initial delays?
Yeah.
And also noting no indicated changes in the costings at this early stage. Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Wong.
Could I ask through the chair, the chief executive, something that's not on this report, but about the water. I believe, I recall earlier in the year, we had a request from the central government for costing on fluoridation, that word, of our water supply. And I've had interest from our local community about exact where we are with this. So that's, if you could give us an update on it.
Yeah, there is no update, unfortunately. So the request that came to us, what you're referring to, I'm just trying to think exactly when that was. I think it was beginning of this year, was for council to revalidate the anticipated costs to fluoridate our water. So that would imply that there's a next step, but there's been nothing forthcoming since we've revalidated.
Thank you.
Has the same occurred to you? Yeah. So it's the same as for Manawa too, there, councillor.
Thank you for the question. Councillor Dalgety.
Look, I'm sorry. I actually have questions about the wastewater compliance.
Yeah, well, what page, so we can just step through to that?
It was, so you jumped straight through the property management.
My
So I'm
apologies.
sorry.
Happy to go back.
Thank you. So on page 30, I just see that around the Taihape wastewater, that reconsenting program is scheduled to be completed by the 1st of July. Just checking on whether that was possible or not.
No, it isn't. Just answer that, yes. Already passed, obviously. We are working with the iwi there to get a cultural impact assessment that will be part of the consent. So we actually have a iwi hui set up for next week. The consent will still take, I want to be cautious and say a couple of months, I would say, to finalise. But this is the short-term consent that is for the next sort of 10 years. With a look at how we could potentially do a land irrigation in that area, which is very challenging, even based on the topography that's in Taihape. But yes, you're right, it's not going to be the 1st of July. They are working on it and they're pretty close, though. The consultant we're working with is very close to completing the application. We are waiting on some input that has to come back to us, and hopefully we get an update on that next week.
Thank you. And
Thank you for that, thank you for that
one
question.
other, sorry.
Just, yeah,
Um,
just one further question from you, yes, councillor.
so I see in Mangaweka and Hunterville, we're going to be doing the smoke testing. So is there just any advice to our householders in that direction, and how's that going? I believe it's imminent.
It actually, as far as I know, has been completed.
All right.
There was a lot of communication on Facebook. We did a letter drop, and there was advice to the fire and emergency people that are in that space, because people get alerted by smoke coming out of their houses.
Right.
So I think it was very well communicated. We had some really good templates from another council that did a similar exercise, and there was a lot of education around this process. And then now they will be looking at the results and analyse, where the issues could be and how we could improve.
Awesome. Thank
Thank
you.
you for that. Chief Executive, you had a question or
Well,
comment?
I think, Ferdinand, if you could just, in terms of Tai Happy Wastewater, there is funding this year in our capital program from this year's annual plan.
Yeah.
Could you comment on that? I think
Sure.
that might be helpful for councillors'
Yeah.
question.
So the consenting part of the Taipei treatment plant, that's already been well underway, but through the annual plan process, we now actually have got another $2 million worth of improvements that we can make on the treatment plant, which is really needed. So we had multiple reports around the treatment plant and the state it is in, and what improvement need to be completed, including a sludge survey that we completed there, that now we have to action it. So there's a good amount of sludge that needs to be taken out over, it will take over quite a long time. There's various ways of how you can complete this work without having too much cost with it, but there will be rubbish coming from that will be disposed. So the $2 million will cover a number of improvements to the plant that should see a significant quality improvement to the plant, and hopefully compliance in that space. And then also the removal of some of the sludge and dealing with that as well. So for both areas.
Actually, my apologies to the committee. Yes, I did step over that report. The significance of it shouldn't be missed. So I'm very, very happy for any questions around water compliance and some of the complexities in there to be raised. So please accept my apologies for that, Your Worship.
Yeah, I did have a comment about the sludge removal, but the question I have with regard to that is, the plant will still be able to operate, and will it be a vacuum type process?
I think the most likely way, and I don't know the proper word for it, but there's a big bag that the sludge gets sucked out into. Geobag, thank you. It's a little bit gross. And the liquid will seep out of it through like little holes basically, and what remains is matter that you have to dispose at the landfill. So that's the common process. It takes quite a while, obviously, because the process is slow. You want to make sure that just the liquid gets out, and that you don't empty the whole sludge bag into the pond. But basically, that's kind of what it was. Yes, please.
So the bag, like basically like a sausage, let's just say, with all the water taken out, it's either a disposal to landfill, or depending on the site and the volumes, you can actually go through a consent process for a monofill on site and effectively bury it and leave it on site as a contained sort of tomb of sludge, if you like. So there's options there, and it's just a matter of evaluating the most cost effective, environmentally friendly, and any other stakeholders that may be involved in that decision process. But taking sludge to landfill is not a cheap option. So applying for landfill consents is not a cheap option either. So there's no get out of jail free when it comes to desludging historical ponds.
I have had the opportunity of looking at some of this report with Tino and Arno, and we were commenting when we met about the complexities of these reports, which will indicate non-compliance or a red when it can be in a particular month, which gives you that non-compliance is a yearly rating, but it doesn't necessarily pick up the fact that the issue that may have been non-compliant last month was addressed this month, and therefore you are now currently in a green position. However, it is noted in reporting that you were non-compliant at that point, which makes it plainly appear to be non-compliant as a non-compliant rating for the year. So it's in the complexities of some of these, how they read, to looking at them can seem quite alarming when you see the read, but it's not to say that the action of correction hasn't taken place, that at a given point you would have a different readout if you printed out the same report right here and right now. We were talking about that, and it's difficult to report on, but it is what it is. Because I recall back in one of my first terms on council, I couldn't get my head around the fact that non-compliant is non-compliant. There was no, but there's, and sadly there is degrees of non-compliant, I guess, to a certain extent. Your Worship.
Yeah, there's a couple of gaps in the report about continuous monitoring. And because it hasn't happened, or we haven't been able to say compliant, there's a couple of those reports which that effectively goes back and says we're non-compliant.
Yeah, just to comment on that, it applies both to water and wastewater, as you say, and it is quite frustrating. And you'd have what I would call a technical non-compliance as opposed to an environmental non-compliance. And so the fact that you have a continuous monitoring record that drops out because of a power failure or a system error doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden producing dirty water or putting raw sewage in the stream. It just means that you can't demonstrate the continuous monitoring to show the compliance. And so you get into this circular argument about what impact it's had and the technical nature of it. And when you've got a multitude of consents with a multitude of conditions on each, and a multitude of drinking water suppliers, and it becomes a very admin heavy technical process to achieve compliance, to be honest.
Further questions around?
Just, I may have, if I may.
Yes, Councillor.
I may have missed this, but really the implication of not being compliant for a further 2 months with the Taipi wastewater, waiting for that consent, is really just to be in touch with Horizons. Am I right? Yeah.
So we are keeping them updated on our progress, and they're quite happy to see that there's a commitment from council to not just Taipi but Martin Bulls, all of them really. We already started some conversations around Ko'itiata and Hunterville. So I think they're very happy that we are in discussion with all these things and that we are aware and working on them.
We embarked on a very, very detailed program with WSP some time ago to look at our compliance schedule right across the board, fully understanding the timeframes and the complexities that it takes to actually apply for these consents, which, from my understanding, involves moving regulation throughout the process of applying for the consent. So it's very, 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 very complex.
Through Mr. Chair, from experience, you'd want to give yourself 5 years in many cases to go through a process from start to finish, which sounds hard work, and to be honest it is when you look at the environmental and the stakeholder groups to be involved in the changing goalposts that may come through national policies around freshwater statements and the Horizons 1 plan. It's a very technical, complicated process, even if you're producing clean effluent.
Okay. Further questions specifically around that nature, and not so that I don't miss anything, moving on to the waste management, so I don't get pulled up twice in the same meeting. Any questions around the solid waste? Any comments around that? Thank you. Moving back to the project manager's report, I don't need to take any guidance, seeing as we jump back into that report. We're still happy that it was carried. Thank you. We were back at the PMO report. Dina, you were taking us through a couple of bits and pieces on that and some updates that you had. We dealt with Martin Water, I think. Was there anything else jumping out at you?
I was keen to update as well on the Taipi Amenities Building. There will be, unfortunately, another delay to the opening, which is really disappointing. There's the balustrade that we have to make as a plan B that we had faced because of wet timber. Basically takes until the end of this month to be completed and is part of a fire safety of the building. So unfortunately can't really go without it. So I'm looking at dates and looking at sort of maybe Saturday the 12th of August as a date that I'm very certain of that we will be completed. Otherwise, other than that part of the building, there's really only very small bits and pieces. There will be a deep clean of the facility. They're sealing some of the decking around it, but it is looking great. It really is going to be a nice warm building to get changed and shower. But unfortunately, yeah, is another delay to what I was hoping was going to be earlier.
Yeah, that's a shame, and I know equally disappointing for you, Adina, and the project management team to have that, and also to have to bring that to us to say that it's been delayed because it's a delay to the Taipi community as well. So unfortunately, it is what it is. We need to get it right, and we need to make sure that we're operating safely, and presenting a safe building, and we certainly aren't going to take any shortcuts in that respect. So I think with the committee's agreement that is what it is, and we'll do the best. Anything further on other matters in the report?
Just on,
Sorry, on Taipi?
yeah, Taipi Amenities building, you've got a risk of cost overruns here. How is the budget going? Like, what do you foresee the end result looking like?
So we're currently sitting within the budget and have contingency around $40,000 left. So it's getting tight. I have to say it's been amazing to see that we have been able to stay within this budget. The delays obviously have been significant. We were looking at an opening of December. So I'm pleased in the space that some of the challenges that we've faced, some of the consultants have also taken sort of the responsibility in that space. So we had a few hard discussions with some people, and the construction company has been doing a very good job in trying to mitigate some of these challenges that they've been facing. So I would say the working relationship after this project is really, really good still. They improved even the discussions with the regulatory teams are all in all, I would say it's very positive. We're still within budget, and I'm expecting that we are going to be within budget. It is tight. Yeah.
Subsequent
comment.
question.
Well done, because it's not easy in that space at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, I think, and it is a good question to raise, Councillor Loudon, but of course a risk of cost overruns is in every project that we do. So it's always going to be listed in our thinking as we go through. What are the risks that we're going to face as we go through these projects? And I refer back to my chair's report about stopping and just having a little bit of a check-in at some stage, which I think we've done on that wastewater one. The risks of cost overrun are always real and always need to be in there and listed and considered as part of it. But you're right, Simon. It's a pleasing result, and thank you for that. So that's good. Councillor Wong.
Could I just add on to that, thanking Adina to keep the Taipi Amenities blog on budget. It is a great disappointment because the rugby finished last weekend and both teams lost the finals. So it would have been really nice because they were looking forward to, and it would be really positive if they actually had managed to get in there before the season. So not to be too negative because I appreciate what you have done. But I did read your report, so.
Before opening it up to the floor, generally on the PMO report, again, it's one that we have seen. Is there any further updates that you have, Adina, apart from those two?
Not really, no, there's nothing jumping out at me that I wanted to share.
Does anybody have any specific? Sorry, you do have one? Yeah,
I
jump
do,
in.
yes, I was just looking at the list. The Ratana project is one that I actually was keen to update you on. So we are working with, since Damien has left, we're working with a contractor basically, Blair, who's been doing a really good job pushing ahead with this project. So we have a number of little construction sites, I want to call them, where we're having the detailed design for the pipeline, the pump station, the access road that has to go to that site, and a number of bits and pieces of work that he's pulling together quite well. So we are hoping that, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to make it this council meeting, but definitely the next we will present a bit of a ballpark budget report that is going to really summarise everything that we're looking at and outlining where there are potential overspends that we've been alluding to. So hopefully, we can bring this to you this month or the next in council. The consent application, we had a response that we were preparing. that is now also nearly completed, expected to be sent out end of this week, early next week, which then again will kick that process back into place, trying to finalise the application and hopefully understanding what it is that we're going to have to comply with and monitor following the consent approval. So there's a lot of work happening in the background at the moment, and there's some really good direct discussions with some of our contractors that we've worked on other projects before that are significant cost saving compared to some of other procurement methods. So that will be something that I will be bringing back to council to see if you agree with the approach that we're taking in that space, and happy to seek your guidance on that. So just so that you know, this is coming this month or next month, I will, yeah.
Certainly know that Councillor Lambert will be very happy to hear the words cost savings, as he always likes to mention.
Wasn't, yes, my ears did attune to that comment, yes.
Could I just ask, again, referring to my my chair's report, another project that's been sitting here with council since July 2018, which is a long time. So timeframes, we're now within 18 months, according to the timeframe of the conclusion of this project, which I would consider that to be a conclusion, that this project is coming to an end. Timeframe, are we still reasonably comfortable that we're in this, given the comment about the complexities around the final consenting?
Yeah, I am confident. I mean, this is all linked to the Ministry for Environment funding as well. So they have granted us a 12 months extension on the date we get approval for our consent. And there's the work that Blair's doing at the moment. This is all part of making sure that we're hitting that deadline. So this is all going to be, we're doing a lot of things in parallel at the moment to be able to do this. And the significant progress that we have made in this project, it seems so little, but is finding this land and having this consent application lodged is a huge amount of work that has been done. And what we're doing now, I mean, still is a lot of work, but it kind of feels easier, you know, so it's not as complex. It's things that we can easily decide ourselves, and it's a road that we have to build, and it's a pipeline, so it's, you know, it's easier.
Certainly we had that come to us at the previous council meeting, but certainly that was a big piece of the puzzle that's now been ticked off. Your Worship, you had a question?
I should know the answer to this, but do we have a policy in place that we peer review the design projects of these things if it's over a certain sum of money? Do we have an existing process around that? So when you say you're going to come back to us with a process for our approval, is there an automatic process that we get designs or processes peer reviewed?
Process or design?
Well, say we put in place a process for Martin Water or Martin wastewater. Is there a process that we automatically assume anything over 5 million or 10 million is peer reviewed? Do we have anything around that?
Comment from you, Adina?
There's no automatic way that we always peer review every design that is being done. There's a couple of points why. The demand of people that can review is the same demand of people that make the designs. So very challenging, and it's extra cost as well. So I think what we are lucky that we have is Arno is very, very good in this space. He really understands this area, and he is an engineer. So he is reviewing all the things that come through here. So any, for example, Taiapi, there were suggestions around the upgrades that we should do, and he reviewed this and had his own thoughts around and discussed with the consultants of what may be a better approach possibly, and there was some, you know, optimization in that space. So because we have Arno, we are fortunate to have an engineer looking at these things.
An independent peer review.
Yeah.
We do.
And in some cases, we sometimes do go to a couple of consultants. It really depends on the work that we're doing and how many options there are to do that work and achieve the same outcome. So, yeah, having a straight, I don't know if other councils do that, to be honest. They might.
Can I ask Hamish your thoughts on that and what your processes might be from your experience for significant projects of this nature? And and advice if you had some.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, obviously there's a sort of a blended model in terms of the RDC PMO and the MDC shared services that work across a range of roading and Three Waters projects. So we don't have, as Your Worship sort of points out, a dollar figure as such in terms of a trigger. It's more based on a sort of a risk assessment by the internal project team at all levels through to the Arno on this side and probably myself on the MDC side around what level of risk or expertise we do or don't have internally, and that's usually to be honest, I'd probably call it the subjective assessment around what peer review externally is required. We do regularly undertake peer reviews, particularly when it comes to the likes of water treatment and also bridge structural type work, and then some of the consenting work as well. So it's really a risk assessment, not a financial threshold, which makes that call, and it's done at essentially a senior officer level within both councils. Yeah. And I think that works well.
I'm just wondering, Mr. Chairman, whether it would be advisable for us to have a line decision within projects as to whether, for some reason, cost or risk, that there is a peer review process. Now, we're talking fairly large sums of money and processes.
I think that's a conversation that could be had in conjunction with our project managers team, but probably something we're not going to fix right now. But you've got further comment?
Yeah, I think just if I could have further comment, I think it's probably relevant in the project charter and project documentation around not what the threshold may or may not be, but whether a peer review has been done, and if so, why, and if not, why not. And that way it demonstrates that there's been some deliberate thinking around it, which is captured in the documentation. And then if there is a peer review, that's great. And if not, you know why. I think that would probably meet that requirement.
Yeah. So I would like us to consider that as a principle. And I think Hamish has got it right in what he's...
It's a suggestion in the overall reporting going forward.
Yeah. Project charter.
We could work that in a discussion, Adina, with yourself and Anna. We'll have a look at that. That's got merit. Councillor Loudon.
Just a question of Hamish, if I may. Just when you assess the risk, does that stay at a council level, or does that ever get elevated to a governance level?
So through you, Mr. Chair, from an MDC perspective, through the shared service, it certainly sits at a senior officer level. We don't refer to our governance team, whether it's through a focus group, a workshop, or a formal council resolution as to whether we should or should not conduct a peer review. Typically, that's covered off in the way that I've outlined, and if there has been a peer review done and it's relevant to the project, that would be included in the project report that would eventually come to council for the award of a procurement outcome contract. So we typically take it at a technical senior staff level, not at a governance level in terms of that risk assessment on the project.
Yeah, I think that could be a good way forward. Yeah. Perhaps that's some work we could do in it, but I can see that having relevance to councillors right across the board. I think that would be quite good. I'll ask you again. Anything further, Adina, on the PMO reporting, Councillor Dalketty?
I'm just exposing huge ignorance here in terms of how the bores work. So we've drilled 462 metres, and then a strata has been developed to 87. Can you just explain the workability of that, what we're trying to do there?
So with bores, there's obviously, when you go through into the ground, there's different levels of, we could call them underwater rivers. There are areas of where water sits, and either that water is refurbished while you take it, for example, or sometimes it's just pockets of water that sit there. So while we were going down to the 400 metres, they can, based on what comes out, so they have a machine that spits out basically a bit of a mud mixture. And based on this, they actually are mapping every layer of earth they're going through. And when they hit something where they can see there's actually a lot of liquid coming out, they realize, this is probably the next water body. And then they can work out how long, they measure how far that goes so that they can measure the height of this water body. And based on this mapping, they were able to then basically say there are 3 different stratas that are potentially suitable. And then they went and tested those 3 stratas. So they went to each of these points, took water out and did like a flow test as well. So they measured, they took out a number of liters every second basically, and then measured if any water dropped in that space. So if the water would drop in that strata, then it actually is not a good sign. It means that it eventually will sort of be empty. But if they keep taking water, but the level doesn't change, it means that it's like a river basically that has a constant flow of groundwater. And with the water that they're taking out, that gets sent to a lab, and in that lab they assess the levels of magnesium and all the things that are in the water that are relevant to treatment and that are maybe unhealthy for us to drink, and assess what levels there were. And it is interesting to see those 3 in comparison. It's probably something I could share with you. There's a little table that basically summarized that, the top water was maybe a bit softer from the level, but it was actually not as healthy to drink because of another level that was higher. And then the more you went down, that changed, that dial. And in the end, the strata that was chosen is kind of in the middle of the 3, and similar to the water that we already get from the Tutunui bore, because it is a level where all the different dials, that are in the water, we can actually treat to a level that it is safe and good to drink and taste good. So that's basically how it works. Then once they tested that, they now establish a proper bore that has like a sleeve of a certain measurement that will be in the ground for many years, and will then have at the part where the strata is, there's a bit of a filter, like a sieve, I guess you could say, and the water then can go into that pipe and up and get sucked out. But it doesn't. You have to make sure that there's other material in these stratas that they don't get sucked up at the same time, because it will block filters and all sorts of things. So it's quite a art to get this all right and make sure that you have the right filters and the right sifts on the ground basically, so that you just get the good water out.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Thank you for the very non-technical description of all that for all us non-technical people. But no, that was good. Hamish, did you have any comment on that one? It's a project being managed by you and the MDC team?
It is, yeah, and Adina's actually given a really good explanation there. Just one point I want to make is that you talk about the test bore and the production bore. So we actually put down all of what Adina's explained to determine the water depth, quality, and everything else is on a cheaper, smaller test bore. And then once you've established your target depth, then you spend the real money to put your production bore down as it runs. So it's a cost-effective way of making sure that you know what the water source you want is, where you're getting it from, and then from there you design your treatment plant around that. So that's a really good explanation.
Yeah, I agree. The key is to understand the water that we're going to use to help us actually design the treatment plant. We need to design the water, so it's following that process, which is why we're in that design stage now. We've got a great understanding of where the water's coming from and at what strata, and that's going to help us to design the plant to accommodate that. Your worship.
Yeah, I'm just aware that we have literally thousands of people walking past these boards, and I routinely get asked, would it be possible to have something like an Israeli board illustration on the security fence? Because the BNC dams, literally the number of people that walk around them are through the roof. And if I'm there, they always say, oh, these machines are still sitting here, what's happening?
Yeah, that would be another form of communicating the scale of the project. Yeah, that's useful. I'm sure that doesn't need anything more than just passing that on to your in-house team that does that graphics and other fancy bits and pieces.
It's been planned for some time, hasn't it, to do that? I think. Yeah.
It's there's multiple. So when you put a board up, then you make sure that you have to update it as well. So I'm thinking that the infographic that we developed is maybe a good thing to actually put up in a big scale and have the explanation.
It does, yeah, good idea.
Okay, are there any further matters sitting in the back of people's mind that I forgot to ask you to ask?
Just one comment, having recently put a bore in, and I could add to Adina's very thorough explanation. When you do get started, like a lot of that matter that can come into the bore can cause a bit of wear and tear. So you do have a bit of teething trouble when you get started. So don't be surprised if you've got to replace a sleeve or something just after we get started. It's not unusual. So
ongoing. Yeah, so.
And that's a really relevant point too, and I guess when you've set a budget for a bore and you've got a target depth, if you don't find the water you're looking for, as Adina's outlined, then you've either got to pack up and go somewhere else, or you keep drilling. And so it's not uncommon that you have to go deeper than you'd intended, which means more drilling cost in your test bore, and then more cost in terms of your sleeve and depth for the production bore as well. So there is an art to it, as Adina's outlined. And if you get a budget for a bore which then increases by 50%, there's some genuine reasons for that. So it can be a fairly high risk way of spending money.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's good to note that it is high risk. But again, referring back to my chair's reports, the reasons for taking that risk and the reasons for the expectations of what we're trying to achieve remain constant all the way through. So they validate the steps and actions that you need to take if what you're trying to achieve at the end still serves the purpose of what we want to deliver, which we're all agreed on, is a constant delivery of water that constantly meets what we feel is an appropriate standard, and that standard may not necessarily just be based on what someone says, well, it's healthy to drink. We want to be a next level above that. So our reasons for embarking on the whole project, again, it's a project that's been around a number of years, and we know it's an $11 million project. It is a project that is the desire of the council is to deliver this constantly good quality water for our communities. And yes, cost comes into a factor of it, but we don't lose the insight of the goal as to what we're looking to achieve. And I think that sits with a number of our projects, that we need to remain, if the objectives of doing it are still true and are still real, then we keep pushing forward. So possibly I'm going to say that's my final words on the subject as we come to the end of the project management report. Is there anything further from that, Councillor? Happy to move. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Lambert, thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Against? That motion is carried. I think that brings us to the conclusion of today's meeting. Is there anything pressing from councillors? Any last minute business that you'd like to bring up that's can be dealt with at this meeting? If not, once again, thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your spirited bidding, as they often say at an auction, and thank you for your attendance and your free and frank conversations and open debate. So thanks, team, much appreciated, and we'll call the meeting to a close. Thanks to those online, and we'll go from there. Thank you.